Redefining marriage. Wow, that is more than a notion. Hi there. Welcome to Redefining My 60s on My Own Terms. My name is Suzette Viernon, and in today's episode, we're going to talk about part two of a two-parter. The first part was about redefining me at 65 years old. Woo woo. And the second part is about redefining marriage at 65 years old. Now, when this drops, I will probably be 65 or almost that. Right now, while recording, I'm exactly 7 days, 1 week from being 65 years old and from being married for 10 years. Now, to some people, being married for 10 years might not seem like much, but to a twice divorced woman with subsequent failed relationships, because I was a magnet for unavailable men and did not meet the love of my life until I turned 50. He surprised me and proposed when I was 54 at my 54th birthday party, and we got married a year later on my birthday at 55 years old. So, yes, it is a third marriage for me and a first marriage for my husband. And it's been quite a journey. It's been a love story for the ages, for sure, because who would have thought that I would have gotten married or would have found the love of my life at 50 years old after such a reckless and naive and ill-informed relationship history. Painful, chills, spills, drama. It's his fault. Where are the good men? All the things. All the things that as we get older, we tell ourselves to make ourselves feel better about ourselves. That blame game is something. Either the blame is turned externally or worse, is turned internally. And I hope this episode blesses you whether you're married or not, because I know there are a lot of women who are past the age of 30, 40, 50, or even 60 who are still grappling with the consequences, the mental and emotional consequences of a failed relationship, of a relationship that didn't meet expectations. Whether you think it affected you or not, whether you've been to therapy or you haven't, there are some things that still reside in the marrow of our limited scope and limited understanding about ourselves, the blind spots about ourselves, the things that we don't know. We've heard, we parrot what we've heard, we wish for, we say it ought to be this way, but without an experience to attach to all that, the sad thing is we just don't know what we don't know. And for years I did not know what I did not know. Now, granted, as I worked on myself and attempted to, follow the breadcrumbs that the universe kept leaving for me, going from misunderstanding to having a better understanding of exactly what life was trying to show me. Not about men and people, but about myself. The faulty wiring, the broken picker, the ill-informedness, the over-romanticization, the pain talk that kind of that talk that tells you that you need to find somebody different from your ex, but yet you keep right on being attracted to somebody like your ex. They're just wearing different shoes. That part. So I went through all the ups and downs. The road to marriage was not easy for me at all. It was very disappointing in a lot of ways. I kind of thought that because my parents had stayed married and I was a good church girl and I tried to live the best way I could. I gave my heart to God at 7 years old, and I made mistakes, but I always tried to pick myself up and go to the altar and repent and do all the things that I was taught to do. Fasted, prayed, spoke in tongues, danced it out, praised it out. Everything. I did all that I knew, but I still kept falling short. And it was interesting because what really inspired this redefining marriage was a good girlfriend of mine sent me something that she had seen that Mr. Frazier had recorded recently about the decline of the black family and how in the pecking order of families, we were the lowest, that the black family was in trouble, that so many marriages were ending in divorce, they were breaking up, so many people were choosing not to get married, that we were really in crisis in comparison to the other races. And when my girlfriend sent me this, the floodgates just opened. And everything just came out about how for years my concern and my observation was that we were teaching our daughters and our sons how to get a good education, how to excel in school, excel in college, follow their dreams, learn how to live on their own, learn how to make money, do all that, right? But then when it came to relationships, dismal failure. How so many of our daughters and sons were not taught how to relate. And it didn't matter whether they grew up in a single parent household raised by a mother or a father or a big mama or a grandma, or whether they came from two parent homes where they had a mom and a dad who had been married for years, or whether their mom and dad were great examples of what a great marriage looked like, yet and still their daughters and sons found themselves in relationships that just did not live up to the hype, found themselves not prepared for marriage, and sadly, marriages ended in divorce. So when she sent me this, it just stirred up all of that, just my dismay. And you might think, well, Suzette, hey, you're of a different generation, but your generation had divorces and stuff like that too. Yeah, we did. And I think because of our failures, we have raised a generation of sons and daughters who, one, marriage ain't even on their to-do list. Two, we've taught them that marriage ain't all that relationships ain't all that. Go get yours. Leave that man alone, leave that girl alone. You get in them books, you get you a good job, you get your own, follow your dreams. We've raised that in a generation. And don't get me wrong, I think that is a good thing. Except for it's incomplete though. That's what makes it so damaging. They get educated. Our kids get educated on everything but relationships. And even though they might have watched ours, whether it was for good or for ill, they still don't know what they don't know. If they've never experienced a satisfying relationship and kept building on that foundation, that it might have ended, but it didn't end badly. It might have ended, but it didn't damage their self-esteem. It might have ended, but it gave them more clarity as to what it was that they needed for the dreams that were in their heart. And the biggest thing is we then teach them the importance of a vision. Apart from the overly romanticized wine and roses scenario, where, he treats me nice, he takes me to nice places, he's my homie, he's my dog, we get along real good. Well, he asked, so I had to say yes. That was me. I thought that if a man asked me to marry him, that meant he saw value in me. He saw me as marriageable. And that took priority over everything. I never stopped to ask myself, well, wait a minute, do I even want to marry him? Do I know him? Do I like the way I feel when I'm with him? I didn't even think to ask myself those things. I didn't even think to consider my own needs because I wasn't taught to. I was taught to when it came to being a single young lady growing up, when it came to going to college and all those other areas of my life, I was taught to consider myself. But in relationships, I was not. And even if my parents had a great relationship, the hype, the society I grew up in, the matrix, the system, the romantic industry, what was going on around people, with people that I knew, what their beliefs were, what the water cooler talk was, the coffee shop talk was, a bottle of wine and sit down talking about your dating life, all those different things and all the sayings. Some of the sayings that circulated, all men are, well, girl, he's a man. Or in Christendom, I'm waiting on my Boaz. How do you even recognize a Boaz? Because he picks you? Because he treats you nice? Because he wants to marry you? But I wasn't taught. But what about you? Do you even know you well enough to know who's the right person for you? Do you even know how men are wired well enough to be able to select a man on his own recognizance instead of trying to make him a hairy version of yourself? What I observed was a lot of women and men were dating their homies, but didn't understand that that doesn't necessarily make for great husband or wife material. Are you looking at the capacity in that person to handle the ebbs and the flows of just living? Just you finding your way through life. Right? We weren't taught that. We weren't taught that. And then even if we were taught it, we didn't allow ourselves to be in situations where we could have hands-on training to reinforce that we truly got the lesson before deciding to marry somebody. I thought marriage was the end all be all. I thought him wanting to marry me was that it proved that I was doing something right because this man wanted to marry me, right? And I justified it, right? But I wanted to say all that so that you could understand why at 65 I am redefining marriage. Because in some ways I've just lived my way into permission to be myself and to prioritize myself even in marriage. Now, before you throw tomatoes at this video, hear me out. I'm not talking about prioritizing myself like I did when I was single. I'm not talking about behaving as if I don't have a partner. I'm not talking about having a single mindset and bringing that mindset into a relationship and refusing to allow oneness, allow myself to be vulnerable enough to be intimate so that I could cultivate trust of myself and trust of my partner in a way that could bring oneness in the relationship and togetherness. I'm not talking about that kind of single, because sadly, that's what I see a lot. No matter whether the age is the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, or 60s, I see men and women who get married, and once they sign the marriage license and put the matching rings, or the rings on their fingers, they try to force marriage to fit their single paradigm. And marriage just will not do that. And so then there's conflict, because you're trying to approach marriage from a single woman's mindset or a single man's mindset, and it just doesn't work. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about having enough clarity about my worth, my worthiness, and my enoughness to own that and be married at the same time. In other words, learning how to walk and chew gum. I learned how to walk. Therapy helped me to walk, right? Getting over breakups helped me to walk. But the learning to chew gum part was learning how to be a partner in a good relationship, a relationship where both people are willing because they see something in the other one that's worth it. That's the part. That's the part. And even though to a certain degree, I have been able to maintain that, I think with every iteration of me that has come in the last 10 years, a lot of people deal with a different iteration of themselves every 5 years, right? A new shedding and revealing of yourself in ways that you did not realize because you weren't there. You weren't at that time where it was supposed to happen. It's just like you kind of shedding a cocoon. A butterfly can't shed that cocoon until it's time. And I feel like at this 10-year mark, it was another cocoon shedding. So that I'm redefining at this 10-year mark marriage, because I'm not the same woman I was 10 years ago. I'm not. I'm having to redefine myself sexually. I'm having to redefine myself as a partner. I'm having to redefine myself as a contributor to this relationship. I'm having to redefine my role in this marriage. What it is my husband does for me that nobody else can do. and what it is that I do for him that no one else can do, and what is required. What can I do for me that no one else can do? Because as good as my husband is to me, he can't heal me, right? As good as my husband is to me, I'm the only person that can give myself permission to own the changes that are happening within me. It's funny, right before I sat down to do this video, which is a great example of what I mean, one of the things about getting closer to 65 is I am cold. Hands cold, nose cold, feet cold. I am more cold-natured than I have ever been. And so today I cut on the fireplace downstairs and then put a space heater in the loft. Along with, we have central heat. We have centralized heat that you can adjust the top and the bottom, the top floor and the bottom floor. I had all that going. My husband came in the house just, oh my God, it's hot in here. It's hot in here. And normally I would apologize and I would say, well, baby, you go ahead and you cut it down. I'll just get a blanket. I'll just put on more clothes, because my default was to make sure he was okay. And for me to accommodate him first, right? And then figure out a way to adjust to how I was accommodating him, right? But today, when he did it, I said, well, baby, I'm 4 years older than you, about to turn 65. So, yep, this is just the way it is. I'm cold-natured, and it's just going to be hot in here. It wasn't dismissing that he was burning up. I said, you just going to have to walk around here with no clothes. Right? And it just showed an internal change that needed to happen. I didn't realize how much I needed it to happen. But at 65, it's like, you know what? I'm giving myself permission to own where I am instead of trying to adjust for everybody around me. And as a result of that awakening, whose time has come, I'm having to redefine how I show up in my marriage. And it wasn't something that made my husband gawk and be like, who is this woman I'm married to? Because I've always been striving to be forthcoming. And marriage has helped me a lot with that. And because I have the support of a loving husband and a good foundation that we're building our marriage on, it's giving me even more wings to accept that, hey, marriage is a two-way street. It's not a one-way street where the husband gets all the benefits of the wife adjusting to fit him. Because in my generation, there was a lot of that. But it's challenging growth in us both for him to consider my truth too. Because the truth is, as I get older, there's some things that are just going to be. I'm going to try to make the best of them and do the best I can to make healthy decisions. But circulation in the body, there's a reason why a lot of older people's houses are so hot. It's because we're very cold-natured. I got on socks right now. Socks. And right now, my feet, my hands, my nose feel just as ice cold. And I can't wait to be finished with this video so I can go back in my loft where it's just tropical to my liking. Right? So it's those kind of things that are causing me to redefine marriage. Marriage is not something that requires me to always think of what's best for my husband first. Or when I think of or either extreme, either thinking about what's best for my husband first, right, at my expense, or thinking about what works for me first at my husband's expense. It's simply showing up as myself and allowing him, if it is asking for too much, allowing him to tell me instead of me assuming. That's what's being required. That I step forward with what my experience is, what I want, what I need. And then it's up to him to either decide whether he wants to adjust to that or to say, Suzette, I can't take it. I cannot breathe. You got it so hot in this house. I cannot breathe. We got to figure something out. Then it becomes an us figuring it out, not a me figuring it out. And as wonderful as my married life has been, there was still that thing in me that 65 is requiring that I shed. And it's thinking that I already know what somebody else needs, or putting their needs first and assuming that my role is to accommodate. At me reaching 65, I'm realizing that for me, what is required of me is to show up, to stand in my truth, to own it, to say the doggone thing. And then if it stokes or invokes more dialogue, then so be it. Because there's something in me for a lot of years that felt the need to just try to keep the peace, calm things down as quickly as possible. And in many cases, I realized in the aftermath that I was taught that in order to do that, I had to throw myself on my own sword. Right? Well, there are different levels of that. And while I learned to stop in a very overt and real way, as I've gotten down through the layers of self-discovery, I realized there are layers of taking that off. There are layers of it. The sword might have gotten smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, but it was still a sword, right? Or the consequences might have been not as bad, but it was still putting myself in danger, emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, socially, right? And blaming the other person. So in redefining marriage at 65, it is really important for me to just be more forthcoming in my truthfulness and hold my ground and see what my husband says. Because there have been situations where I thought I apologized for something and he didn't even take it that way. I said something flippantly, and then I said, baby, I'm sorry I was flippant. He was like, no. No. He didn't even perceive it that way. Right? And here I'm apologizing for it. And so now it's, you know what, Suzette? It is okay. it is okay. I'll say this and then I'll end because it's already 30 minutes. But even when it came to how we wanted to celebrate this milestone 10 years of marriage, he was already planning a trip to San Juan and never even asked me if I wanted to go. Well, actually, let me change that. There was a conversation that we had had earlier where I was asked if I really wanted to go. And I said, I can't say that was something that I ever really wanted. But, and they said, well, what you want is important. And I walked away and kept living and everything. And I think for both my husband and myself, that was momentary. Because if he had truly heard it, or if I had truly heard it at that moment, I don't think he would have been planning a trip to San Juan. So we both kind of heard it, had a deer in the headlight moment, and it just went on as if it wasn't said. And I was wondering when he brought it to me why I was feeling some kind of way about it. And I realized it was because it came back, you know what? Neither one of us really valued the fact that it wasn't really something that I really would have chosen. And so that conversation led to us really sitting down and writing out what we wanted out of a trip. What things that if the trip didn't have these things, it would not be a great trip. One of those things was had to have great food, right? Great food. Secondly, it had to be a nice place. Toughing it out, being the wilderness family, was not my vibe. It needed to have all the creature comforts and be a place that I felt very comfortable in. The temperature control was right, great part of town, that I felt like it was worth the money we'd be paying to stay there. Third thing was arts and culture. We wanted a place that we could experience the culture and not just go there and do the same things we could do at home. And then I know my husband's a history buff. So for him, there needed to be something like historical. For me being a music person, there had to be something musical. There had to be something in this trip that we could both enjoy together and also enjoy by ourselves too. So once we got clear about that, then we started looking at what could accommodate that so that we both could be so excited about our trip. Right? So that, I think, was the first aha about having to redefine marriage. That marriage isn't just about being selected. It isn't just about being picked. Because for some of us, because the guy asks, we just think, well, okay. Okay. He asked. Okay. And then you try to make yourself fit into the ask. And you ignore all the red flags, run through all the red lights, right? Life trying to talk to you in a whisper, then in a shout. Then you get married to him, and then all the bricks fall down on you, or a brick upside your head, whichever works for you. Bad, just bad. And so I realized there needs to be a redefining of marriage. That's what I'll say in closing. Not just an ever-evolving redefinition of marriage, but also a preparation where marriage becomes important again, where it becomes important again. Not so important that our children define themselves by it, but important enough that when they are dating, they realize I'm not just dating for the good times, right? I'm also vetting whether this person is marriage material, so that if or when he asks for your hand in marriage, you have something foundationally and experientially upon which to base your answer. Whether it's yes, 1000%, or whether it's I'm sorry, even though I've enjoyed dating, I need more from marriage. I need more from a husband. There's some things that cause me concern, and I am not in a position where I am able to or want to commit. Because for me, marriage is a commitment. The family is important. How I spend my life is important. And then ask them, what is your vision for marriage? Not what is your vision for us. A lot of people want to know, well, where is this going? You know, are we headed for marriage or aren't we? That's not the decision of the man to make. That's me redefining marriage. That wasn't my husband's decision to make. The first 2 marriages, I left it up to him, and I was miserable. In this 3rd marriage, I didn't leave it up to him to decide that. I was vetting, not necessarily vetting him for marriage at the time, but vetting to see if he was a good human. If he was someone that I was proud to be with. If he was someone that I felt seen and valued by. Did my heart feel safe? Was being with him, did it feel like being home? A home that my soul was always craving and wanting. And he's that. And the awareness comes. So much and so to a point that it's not even a thing about where we're going with this or whether we get married or not. I'm so grateful to be living in this space of experience. Life is giving me an experience of comfort and positive regard and growth and grace and love. Feels like home. Makes me feel comfortable in my own skin, comfortable enough to be vulnerable, comfortable enough to be me, comfortable enough to go after what it is that my heart longs for, and that he shows me at every turn that he can support it, and he has the capacity, that I'm living my way to understanding his esteem for women. But I could not have done that in this marriage if I had not learned to esteem myself first. So if you're listening to this episode without listening to part 1, where I talk about redefining me, I want you to go back and click the button. It should be showing up somewhere near the end of this episode. And And I want you to listen to it because that was a prerequisite for marriage that I did not understand. And of course, I'm ever growing. But the growth should be more of myself, not less of myself. And I thank God that I have a marriage and I have a partner that has the capacity where I can grow into more of myself. And that can allow for a redefining of marriage, knowing that the definition does not mean that I'm trying to define a life without him in it, but that I'm bringing my best evolving self to the table, to a table that's already big enough for it. So if this episode has blessed you in any way, I hope that you'll like, you'll share, you'll subscribe, and that you will come back for the next episode. If I don't get a chance to tell you before then, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Bye.